Bien, ahora sí, para los que ya buscaron su traductor simultáneo, les pido que vayan prendiéndolos, acomodándose. El título del próximo bloque es Revolucionando el futuro de la alta capacidad y rendimiento, donde Tim va a desarrollar todo el tema de lo invisible, esto que no vemos, que se requiere para estas evoluciones de tecnología. Vamos a recibir con un fuerte aplauso a Tim Doiron, Vice President de Solution Marketing en Finera. Tim, how are you? Fine?
Super.
Yeah. Two things very important for Argentina. First, the best team of soccer is Boca Juniors. First thing.
Sí.
¿Todos de acuerdo? ¿Ven? Todos de acuerdo.
Sí.
Perfecto. Second, and the best player of the world is Messi, that is in your country at the moment.
Gracias.
Gracias.
For Messi.
Yeah. Gracias por Messi. Okay. Thank you, Tim.
Good to see you. Our football needs help, so thank you for loaning him to us for a little bit. Buen día. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Mi español no es muy bueno, so my friend Sylvia will be helping us with some real-time translation, and I promised her I won't go too fast. So if you see me going too fast, you can give me the sign or something to slow down from a translation. Let me just test it. Translation's happening okay, and you're hearing things in Spanish while I'm talking in English. Okay, that's fantastic. My home is in the suburbs of Chicago, but before COVID and after COVID, I spent a lot of time on an airplane traveling to all kinds of places, including beautiful Buenos Aires. The weather since I got here has been fantastic, and I want to say thank you for the great weather and the hospitality. I was going to talk some about Chicago as well, but I see that on the television that you guys have Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, Chicago Medic, and now The Bear is teaching you guys how to cook. So if you have seen that new show, everything happens just like those shows in Chicago, and I don't need to teach you anything else about Chicago. But you're welcome to come visit anytime, and love to have you. The purpose of this presentation, and I think it really fits well with the prior presentations that we heard about data center, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the cloud, is the landscape of data centers is changing. It's changing from where we started, and it's evolving. And our data center interconnect, or our data center connectivity, must evolve and change with it. If we're going to provide cost-effective solutions for today, but how are we going to scale them for tomorrow? We have to do both of those things. And that's what the heart of this particular presentation is about. So let's start with the data centers themselves. And we saw some images from some prior presentations. We also heard some about the data center. Like I said, I travel, and so I was just in Singapore a few weeks ago, and then on to Indonesia. And one of the things that strikes you about Singapore is obviously it's fairly compact, lots of people, but it's also home to over 70 data centers. It's also home to multiple subsea landing cables that bring lots of capacity into Asia. And about 3 years ago, the government put a moratorium on new data center construction. They halted it. And the reason is, and was, because about 7, maybe 8% of the total power generation in Singapore is going to feed the data centers. That's a lot. That's a lot. And so they paused. Who was the recipient of that pause? Who benefited from that pause in some ways? Answer, Malaysia. And so within about 100 kilometers or less of Singapore, data centers start popping up in Malaysia. Now, they've since lifted that moratorium, and they're back enabling some data centers to happen in Singapore, but are they going to continue with 100 megawatt, 150 megawatt, 200 megawatt data centers? Generally speaking, I'm going to make a statement and say no. They're going to build smaller, more modular, more compact, less immediately impactful to the power grid at this particular point, and to the environment and to the space, so maybe I can spread those out. So that's just one picture of what's happening from a data center, and it really affects both kind of the modularity idea, the distributed idea, and also the green are trying to manage the power as well. Another example of that is in suburban Chicago, where I live. When I'm not traveling and doing other things, I like to ride my bicycle on the trails and the paths that are there. There's a massive Cyrus 1 data center close by my house, goes right by the prairie path where I ride my bicycle. And they have expanded that multiple times, and because of demand and because of need and because of capacity and all those reasons. But about a kilometer away, I noticed something else the other day. And it was the construction was happening in a field. I stopped and chatted, and it turns out they're building 3 smaller data centers, not Cyrus 1, other companies, building 3 smaller data centers in about 50 acres of space. And so there's just another example of, we think about hyperscale data centers and them continuing to evolve, totally true. But there's a lot of smaller, modular, distributed data centers happening. And in fact, Cirion here mentioned there are multiple 20 megawatt data centers that are going in, which is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Last point on this slide, smarter. Smarter certainly applies to the data centers themselves. But in this case, what I was thinking about was applications like ChatGPT, which operate in compute clusters inside the data center. That traffic between and amongst those clusters is growing at about 100% per year. It's doubling, in effect. Guess what? That data is not going to stay in that data center like everything else about data centers. It's going to spread out, and it's going to require additional capacity on the interconnection that's there. Okay, we just set up data centers. Last point about data centers and interconnection I want to make here is that don't worry about the exact graphs too much. But if you look at the blue is about where we're headed from a server, from an interface capacity inside the data center, and we're moving to 400 gig. Guess what? Outside of the data center, the same is true also. Routers, switches, and other devices having 400 gigabit per second interfaces, which again is driving that capacity demand for transport into our fiber optic transport networks as well. Okay, what are we going to use to carry this capacity and to connect these data centers? And it's just fun to say the word laser, so I put a slide with lasers here. And so we're going to use lasers, and we're going to use high-speed fiber optic connectivity with lasers and optical engines to make that happen. Well, what kind of lasers are we talking about? No, we're not talking about lasers that blow up planets. from Star Wars, although it's a good scene, but no, we're not talking about lasers for that purpose. We're talking about lasers for good. Lasers and fiber optic engines that connect people and applications to the cloud and each other every single day. That's what we're talking about here. And so when you think about a data center, really like a car sitting in your garage, it's nice to look at, but it doesn't do that much if it's not on the road, if it's not connected and connecting and taking me or the data places, okay? And what kind of connectivity do we need? Well, we need submarine connectivity because we have to cross oceans in some cases. And where's that traffic going? It's going to the data center after it lands. We need to cross continents and get across, whether it's the United States or South America or Europe. We need to get across continents in some cases, countries, cities, local, regional. Microsoft embarked years ago on a metro distributed data center architecture, and those links might be tens or 100 to 120 kilometers. So we've got to support that too. And so the solutions we need from a connectivity perspective have to support all of those applications, but we have to do it cost effectively and still be able to grow. So there's three key technologies that we think are evolving, will continue to evolve, and we need for innovations in this space. One, I said lasers, but really that's a loose word for coherent optical engines. And we're going to continue to evolve that in two directions. Performance in this direction, but also small size, low power in another direction. We also need systems that we can put these engines or lasers into, compact modular systems that take sleds and are like a collection of Legos, where you can build the functions you need, power the functions you need, pay for the functions you need, and easily expand that with time. And the third piece is we think the time is right, technologically, for expanding the amount of spectrum we're using on the fiber so that we can put more lanes on the highway, so that we can put more cars on the highway with more engines. Let's go through all three of those quickly. So life changed in transport networks in 2010 whenever we decided to take a page from the wireless playbook and put digital signal processing with analog optics so we could transmit sophisticated signals and drive more capacity per wavelength and per fiber. Today's solutions are sled-based or embedded. There's a university right here I walked past, and think about the size of a college textbook. That's the size of your embedded engine that goes into a sled. But with miniaturization, we've also made coherent optics. This too has a digital signal processor, a highly integrated analog front end, and we can take these devices that may only do 20 watts of power and put them in all kinds of locations and equipment in the network that we never thought of before, including optical systems that are there. So where did we come from and where are we today? Here's the cool thing. Today's commercially deploying 800 gigabit per second wavelength solutions, that 800 gig one wavelength supplies the same amount of capacity that we used to put in a whole fiber back in 2005. And you'll notice the thing really takes off after the era of coherent innovation, and we begin. Again, we're going to continue to evolve this in multiple directions, low end and high end, and you'll see that here on the next slide. 4 things we think that matter about these coherent engines or these lasers. We're going to have a variety of form factors, and we need that. We're going to focus on performance and moving to the terabit per wavelength era. We're focused on programmability so that we can adapt the optic to the fiber. Maybe that fiber's 20 years old in the subsea network, and it needs to be extended from a life perspective. Programmability is key for that. And we need to be highly manageable, where we can put pluggable optics in all kinds of network elements and locations versus maybe what we did in the past. And so manageability is key, and there's lots of effort happening in the space of manageability. Let's shift now to systems, and I just use the phrase compact modular, but again, think about a set of Legos that I can put together based on the size of the data center and what the data center needs. Does it need to launch a wavelength? Maybe. Does it need to amplify something? Does it need to switch the wavelength? With these compact modular platforms and the ability to apply those Legos to what we need, and multi-chassis capability where we can daisy chain these chassis together, we have a way to go in at least cost at the beginning and hit the capacity demands day 1, but also extend that to day 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we want to be able to put, with these different engines, a lot of different cars on the highway, from motorcycles to big trucks. Went too fast. Okay. If we take the optical engines, or the lasers, and we combine that with the systems that we just talked about, what kind of solutions could we provide? Well, the answer is here. We have typically embedded engines. Again, think of that textbook-sized device that can go into a compact modular platform where fiber is scarce and it's precious, and we need to eke out the most spectral efficiency humanly possible. That's where embedded engines thrive. Subsea, intercontinental, what we would say long haul, and the rest. But there's other cases where maybe we don't need that same capacity reach performance, or fiber is available, more readily available. And so we can use these pluggables inside of the same optical systems that we've talked about. But then there's another paradigm too, where maybe we're talking about that metro distributed data center, and that's where pluggables into routers, call it IP over dense wave division multiplexing, but that's where pluggables and routers and switches and other devices can come to play. And we're providing the best of both worlds, right economics, matching the right need, and matching the extensibility aspect as well. Finally, the third piece of this. We've expanded the transmission spectrum on fiber before, and we went from 4 terahertz, which was what was called standard C-band, but 4 terahertz to 4.8 terahertz, and now we think with the state of technology, the time is right to go to 6.1 terahertz, in effect providing a 27% capacity expansion with really minimal cost implications. And that's just the intersection of integration, innovation, time, and optoelectronic miniaturization. Guess what? There's another band called the L band, and we can apply the same expansion there to, if the fiber runs out of gas with extended C to super C, someday you could also add L band or a whole nother band to that transmission. Again, just think about more cars on the highway and us cost-effectively adding more lanes to the highway that runs between the airport that I came in on and downtown here, Buenos Aires. So let's bring this all together. We talked about the landscape of data centers are changing. We still have hyperscale data centers and lots of them, and bandwidth demands are still growing for those data centers. But increasingly, we see a need for modular and distributed data centers as well. And so we need evolutions in pluggable and embedded optical engines. We need to continue to evolve our compact modular platforms, Legos, so that we can mix and match what's needed in each data center or each transmission location. And we think the time is right economically to apply increased spectrum onto the fiber, something called Super C, so that we can put more cars on the highway, always driving to improve the economics on a price per bit, power per bit basis. And look, at Infinera, we are thrilled to be a partner with Cirion, where together, we are bringing people and applications to the cloud and each other every single day. Thank you very much for your time, and great to be with you.
Thank you, Tim. There are no questions. Maybe it's very, very clear, your presentation. And let me take a picture with you.
Yeah, that would be great.
Like a new fan of Messi, of course.
Sure,
yeah?
sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Tim. Thank you.